In the reading corner today, I'm talking to Minnie Gray, who's the multi-award-winning author of books such as Biscuit Bear, Traction Man, The Adventures of the Dish and the Spoon, Hermelin, and The Lost Wolf, to name just a few of her ingenious picture book creations. She's also illustrated classics by Swedish author Astrid Lindgren, including the Pippi Longstocking stories. But Minnie's most recent book, The Greatest Show on Earth, is her first foray into picture book nonfiction. And it's the story of life on Earth, the history of the Earth, as presented to us in a shoebox theatre by an international troupe of insects. So that's quite a departure, Minnie, although when I thought about it, I could see some connection in this book and your last picture book, The Last Wolf.
No, I think The Last Wolf was the first book where I sort of left the house, because all the books I'd done before had really often been set around the house, even though they weren't. There was a book called Space Dog, was really set around the house, even though it was in space. But then with The Last Wolf, we left the house and went into the world of nature, and I'm surprised it took me so long.
I have to say, just to kick us off, that this is, in my opinion, an absolutely remarkable book to actually cram the history of the Earth from 46 million years ago to looking forward to the Holocene period, as you do in the book. In how many spreads?
Well, I got 48 pages to do 4.5 billion years.
I wonder if we could start by you telling us a little bit about, how long it's taken to come to fruition, this project.
Well, Nikki, it has taken about 10 years, because this book really started in the Natural History Museum in Oxford, and my son Herbie and myself used to hang out in it all the time, especially when Herbie was very little. And I realised that I actually did, when we were looking at the dinosaurs, and I realised, sort of knew 65 million years ago something terrible happened to the dinosaurs, but I didn't really know what animals there were on Earth before the dinosaurs, or actually how old the Earth really was. And so Herbie and me found this out. It was 4.5 billion years. So we went home and made ourselves a sort of little timeline with lots of paper, and Herbie made trilobites, and we put some animals on this thing. And I started to think, this is, to be able to see what this timeline looks like seems to feel really important. And then, who could tell a story? Who could tell the story of life on Earth? Someone that wasn't human, so you could get it from a different point of view. And that's where a troop of insects came in.
The troop of insects is a really interesting choice. Well, of course, there's a practical reason, because they can fit in a shoebox theatre. Yes. But there's also this idea of, insects and their longevity. And I think like the ringmaster is a roach, isn't he? And they are one of the most successful of all creatures.
Yeah. No, cockroaches have been around since about 300 million years ago. And they are the generalists, and the generalists always do well, someone that's not too fussy, who will eat anything. So cockroaches are probably going to carry on into the future. So part of the insect's point of view might be that this book could be set in the future if you wanted it to be. It could be, you could be looking at a post-human world potentially. Mm. But then again, it might not be. It's up to the reader to decide on that one, I think.
Mm. Can we start with this conceit of the theatre and your decisions really about design and planning, which are so clever? And I'm just starting here with the opening, because you're offering a guide to readers here. Tell us a bit about your decisions to set it out in this way.
So part of the reason that this book took so long to bring into a sort of book form was that for a long time it was in a different format. It was a little zigzag book, and it just had scene by scene by scene with Rod and the troupe. And it was quite a seductive little book. People loved this little book when I showed it to them, and we pulled out the zigzag and looked at 4.5 billion years. But it was also a trap, because it didn't really do the story justice. There wasn't enough space to tell each part of the story. And it wasn't until I did a project with Pollock's Toy Theatre Museum. Pollock's used to make well, they still do make these Victorian toy card theatres that you can make for yourself and act out things in. And so I got asked to make a theatre for a show they were doing, and I thought, because I've been thinking about this sort of insect thing, I'll make the insect theatre. But I also they sent me the kind of bits to make your own cardboard theatre with. And I suddenly was looking at it going, well, there's the wings, there's the orchestra pit, there's the main stage, there's these different areas. And so I kind of, I want this tape measure to be visible at the same time. And then I also want, I find it very difficult to read things that are too complicated. So I thought, well, if you've got this main stage idea right in the middle, then you'll always know where to look first. You get this one big snapshot of what's going on. And then you can then dip a bit further in, have a look in the wings to see more about what's going on at the time. And then along the bottom, you can keep a track of what's going on in the tape measure of the time. So we get sort of 3 ways of telling a story simultaneously.
I guess another thing that struck me was, 48 pages, you've said, but you've got to condense all of this time into a few significant moments. And that must have taken, I think, quite a lot of thinking through.
Well, yeah, there's one interesting thing, which is time. And actually what happened was the periods of the Earth, once they've sort of settled down from around the Cambrian time onwards, it's about 500 million years ago onwards, they tend to be about 50 million years long. And they tend to be, the geological periods are sort of separated, usually by a little bit of a mass extinction event, or something happens that means that it wipes out some sets of animals in the fossil record and it heralds a new time zone. But weirdly, they tended to be 50 million years long, and my pages were about 50 centimetres wide. So eventually I could more or less put a geological period kind of in each page. But at the same time, you've got these inventions of evolution. So the first invention is just sort of having a body. So the animals of the kind of the Ediacaran, the age of jelly, they just, what they've invented is actually having an animal body that's sort of made of lots of cells kind of all grouped together. And then there's sort of like the invention of eyes, where things start to really speed up. And then you've got the invention of things like vertebrates. But I feel like the history of evolution is a sort of inventions history, and inside us there's all the things that we used to be, that are in a fish or in a tetrapod, it's all still inside our bodies in a way. So yes, I think it was always interesting trying to work out which story to tell on the tape measure, because 50 million years is a really long time. We just think of what's happening in the climate in the last 100 years, I think 50 million years. So you had to try and make that into like maybe just 1 or 2 little stories going on. But quite often in each geological era, there is a major step forward for evolution. So there's, for example, there's a massive mass extinction in the Permian times, which is 250 million years ago. But that mass extinction kind of clears the decks for the dinosaurs and mammals eventually to take over, and sort of gets rid of a whole load of other animals that were around at the time. So these big steps sort of forward evolutionarily quite often happen an age at a time.
There's so much that I want to pick up from just that little bit that you said, not least that idea of all these things being inside us. And I think you really get a sense of that when you do go to a natural history museum and you see remains and you see skeletons.
Yeah, and basically everything gets repurposed. So the bones that were in fishes were repurposed to turn into our wrists, and repurposed to turn into a head with a neck and ears and things like that we have. So it's all kind of reusing the stuff that we kind of started with.
The other thing that I did want to pick up is that word invention. It's one that you use a lot. It's how you engage us and make us feel excited about these changes that are happening. Some people might say that's not the right word to use, but tell us a little bit about your thinking there.
Yeah, I think that people might think that an invention has to have a sort of human agency to it. but I sort of think an invention is a sort of solution to a problem. And so that evolution has been solving problems and finding ways to get into new niches, how to be so for example, one really big problem is how to be an animal out of water. Because once you're out of water, and when you're in water, you can be jelly, you can be supported by the water. It's great. But once you're on land, it's harsh. There's gravity. You get dried out. You can't. What are you going to do about your eggs? So it's a massive problem. But then, if you can solve being an animal on land, then you can go out there and get the whole of all of that available real estate for yourself. So there's a lot to be won by winning the evolutionary race, and that's what spurs the kind of these inventions. And I think they're inventions.
You're not trying to do everything here. I think you talked about having a scaffold on which you can hang knowledge, and that's what you're really doing here.
Yeah, I mean, part of this came from experiences with my son Herbie at school. And at school, when you're in year 2, year 3, year 4, you do a day of you do your ancient Greeks day or your ancient Greeks project and your Egyptians project. But I kind of always felt, when you do that, you really need to hang it on a timeline so that you can see how far away it was. And I think the way of remembering things is having little pegs in your mind that things can kind of hang on and connect to.
So this notion of what makes it memorable, I think is really important. And I wonder whether story is one aspect of that.
It absolutely is. Stories make things memorable, as you say. Stories make things digestible. And because you have, with a story, you've always got this, what's going to happen in the end? You have this curiosity with a story as well. And I think that all of those things mean that humans are almost better at getting information through stories than almost any other form, potentially. I mean, this is a bit contentious, but I really wanted with this book for it to be a story, so that you felt like you were being told a story.
Let's have a look at one of the early spreads in the book, and we'll talk about the storytelling techniques that you're using. So 4.6 billion years ago, we're looking at the curtain going up on the story of life. And what we see here is your roach, and he's cooking. He's making a pudding. Yeah. So tell us about your kind of storytelling technique that you're using with this.
Well, part of this is I obviously steal everything possible from all over the place. And there was one professor who I actually haven't got their name to hand, but they did work out the recipe for making an Earth-like planet. And I just really I love cookery. And the idea of planetary cookery just sounds like fantastic. So I almost just took their recipe and made it visible. Gave you the spoonfuls of stuff, put it in your cosmic mixer, give it a good blending. But also, the world, it is a bit like that. It does settle down into this delicious cake. I think in a page a bit further on, there's a cross section through Earth. And I think there's a Bill Bryson book called I've got it over there. It's a short history of nearly everything. And he starts with that diagram of the Earth with a slice taken out of it, and that feeling of it's got a crust and it's got a center. It's a bit like an enormous delicious pudding. So and the way the layers settle out and you get a sort of watery ocean. It's a bit like some of the puddings you can make in the oven.
I think it's a really interesting point, because some people, it's not me saying this, by the way, but some people might say children won't get the difference between the fact and the fantasy, the fact and the fiction. But actually, as you've said, scientists use analogy all of the time to try and help us understand things that are very difficult to grasp.
Yeah, absolutely. You need a little picture in your head, someone to conjure up a picture so that you can you can hold it to. It's to make something sort of tangible and understandable. But also it's exciting to compare one thing to another thing. And I think with humans, that sort of metaphors are our currency. You put something with something else and suddenly you've got a new thing because you've put those two things together.
I love that we're still getting, typical characteristic Minnie Gray coming through with the Mr. Doughball tins and this kind of retro mixers and
food packaging. I've got a Mr. Doughball downstairs, a plastic one this big, and I guess it must be things from the 1970s as well.
And we move on. We're still sort of making our earth here, and you're covering things like the Goldilocks zone, not too hot, not too cold. Yeah. I mean, was there one that caused any particular challenge for you?
Well, this one was actually, it's very difficult to work out how to explain the world of microbes.
We're looking at a spread called Around 3 billion years ago, and we've got an image as though seen through a microscope with lots of little microbes in it.
Yeah, it might have looked like not much was going on, but life has got started. Welcome to the world of microbes. And the microbes would probably say that we're still in a world of microbes. But all the things on Earth for a long time were single-celled. But they invented photosynthesis, really. Some of the microbes turned into cyanobacteria who were able to emit a little bit of oxygen, and that gradually raised oxygen levels in the sea and then on in the atmosphere. And that probably paved the way for bigger animals to be able to evolve later. So it was really important this happened, but it's very slow and very boring, possibly, unless you're a microbe, in which case it's really exciting.
See, one of the things that I'm interested in is that this obviously started as a question for you when you were in the Natural History Museum with your son. But as I was reading it, so many questions cropped up for me. And I wondered if that had been the same for you. It must have been when you were producing it, because I'm just thinking, how did that oxygen appear?
Yes. The more questions you have, the more you can go, oh, no, I've got to find something else out. So there is, yes, every time you come to a page, and because I've got a terrible memory, I would have forgotten all the things I tried to research the last time I was looking at that page. And then you have all these questions coming all over again, and then trying to understand it enough to turn it into a piece of writing that someone else could, who maybe is quite young, could understand and actually get it right. It's quite a distillation process, I think. And it's also quite interesting kind of seeing whether you can cope with throwing in some nice big words. So I love the word stromatolite. But I think little kids, you look at how many dinosaur names they know. They love those long words. So stromatolite, yay.
It was interesting. I was going to ask you about that, because actually most of those long words are nouns. And so you can attaching labels to things is actually quite an easy thing to do. Not like the big scientific processes where you have one word for a huge process. That's much more difficult to understand. But I think you can understand the names of things. You might just not be able to pronounce them.
That's a really interesting point, actually. I'd never thought of it that way around. But yeah, that's it. I mean, in the tape measure of time that goes along at the bottom, there's a lot of animals, but they have their little names underneath the little animal that's on a cocktail stick that the ants are popping on the tape measure at the bottom. And again, I thought loads of the names are really odd and long, but it's great to have them there so that if you want to, as a kid, you can get the proper scientific name and look it up if you want.
I love this. We're now looking at 541 million years ago, precisely. I love the voice coming in here. And these creatures that we see from the Cambrian period, they're presented as puppets on strings, very playful.
I mean, what's happened here is that animals invented having eyes, and they were all quite experimental. So a lot of them are on the segmented style of body plan, a bit like the silverfish or a centipede or a scorpion, but lots of them had really weird body setups. So they're in the stage, our Beetle and Edna, the earwig, are trying to put an animal together, but actually this animal is a model of an animal called hallucigenia, that when people found the fossils of this animal, they couldn't work out which way up it was. It seemed to have appendages going both directions. Then there's Opobinia, which is this sort of swimming aroundy thing that had a grabbing kind of proboscis bit, but it also had 5 eyes. Like, why do you need 5 eyes? But they just seem to be trying out all sorts of different body plans that eventually settle into, you can sort of see those body plans settling into things like horseshoe crabs and our trilobites that go on for quite a long time, that are quite like wood lice.
So I suppose I'm interested to know how you went about your research. Apart from the Natural History Museum, were scientists an important part of your fact-checking?
Yeah, so I was very lucky. So I got in touch with Professor David Waltham, who I mentioned earlier, and he did some fact-checking for me, took the whole book and fact-checked for me, which is great. And then I also got in touch with the director of the Natural History Museum in Oxford, who's called Professor Paul Smith, and he offered to fact-check too, which is brilliant. Sometimes I wanted to find out a very particular thing. So I, for example, I really wanted to find out what a dinosaur lung would look like, because their lungs had lots of air sacs. So dinosaurs are just incredible. They could get to be so big because their bones were really, really lightweight because of this air sacs. But this was all paving the way for them to become birds in the future. And there's an amazing dinosaur professor called Professor Steve Brusati, and he answered a question about sauropod lungs, and so for particular things that was fantastic, and people are really accessible. But when I was just really stuck, I had my sort of go-to books. So one of them was this Dorling Kindersley dinosaur encyclopedia, and it's not just dinosaurs. It's got the Cambrian animals in it, and the Ediacaran animals, and it's got mammals and mammal-like reptiles and everything. So that was, and it has these really vivid pictures in it that really bring it to life. It's like having a time machine and going back to the Ediacaran Sea and seeing what it would be really like if you had a little submarine to drive around in there.
I'll just say before you move on to the other books that I do want to hear about, that your way of dealing with the mammals in this book is just lovely, because the insects have all cut out different parts of animals from magazines and collaged them together. And I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about the creative opportunities for children with a book like this.
If you remember that page right at the beginning that sort of tells you how to read it, with the main stage, Orchestra, Piss and the Wings. And that was almost like one of the first things I made when I was trying to make a big book version of this. And I cut out the middle of the theatre so I could put different scenery inside it. I cut out insects and moved them around. It's playing. Mm-hmm. And the great thing about something like a little model theatre is that you can take anything you like and put it in. So just playing with what happens with a sort of theatre book page. Yeah, I'd love children to just go and play with what they could do with a little insect theatre.
Or make a slightly bigger one out of a bigger box as a class, a class project that several children could play with together. I'm so sorry, Minnie, I interrupted you, but I just thought it's taken us off on an interesting sideline there. But do tell us about the other books that were important to you as well.
Oh, yeah. One book is a set of, it's not one book, it's a set of books. It's 3 books, and they're all by Hannah Bonner, and they're published by National Geographic. But there's 3 of them. One is about when bugs were big. One's about when fish got feet, and one's about when dinos dawned. So those were fantastic. And one last book that I always went back to as well when I just wanted to see a snapshot of things is there's a book called The What on Earth Wall Book. And it's a big zigzag book by Christopher Lloyd. And it shows you sort of multiple timelines happening simultaneously on Earth, in the sea, the different continents kind of moving on Earth. So that was a really great way to just go back and go, well, what was really happening 350 million years ago? And you can see it as a slice with that one.
I'm going to skip to the end for a moment. Yeah. I know there's so much more that we could be saying as we pass the dinosaurs, but they get lots of airtime, don't they? And I just want to talk a little bit about the end in your book. And one of the things that you have on this page, it's right at the end, it says, welcome to the glossary. Not only have you got your words and their definitions, but you've got another timeline here, which I found incredibly helpful. Oh, and right. The thing that was really helpful as well was the image of the Earth
these Earths are kind of hidden all along in the timeline going along, but you don't really see them because there's numbers on the Earths. And so it's sort of slightly obliterating what the continents of the Earth are doing. But the story of the continents moving around the Earth, the way things happened because quite often there was either a sort of things tearing apart, making huge lava eruptions, or there was continents kind of fused together and all piled up together in one place, which gives you a really extreme climates. Sometimes it's because the Earth has got ice at the poles. Sometimes there's no ice at the poles, so that the sea level is going to be loads higher. So there'll be lots of the land will be underwater. And all of this influences life on Earth and makes all the things that happened happen. So I did really want, I always wanted to have an animation of those continents moving their way around the Earth, doing their thing, because I just think it's quite transfixing to see Africa. When you look at the Earth, you can see this kind of mystery, because the profile of Africa and the profile of America look like they should fit together like a jigsaw puzzle. And you kind of go, well, why is that? But of course, that's because they did once fit together. And then ever since, that shape that fits them together is now in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean.
Absolutely fascinating. Well, this is a really good example of how the visual makes something very clear in, just at a glance, you get that. Let's just go back to the end, as it were. And we have got to deal with the future in this book. And we have the very far future and the nearer future. And I'm sure you had a balancing act here to play, thinking about the readers of these books, who will always think that maybe it's tomorrow that the world is going to end, that they inevitably, they think that will that happen in my lifetime. So I'm sure you had to consider that and how you were dealing with it.
Yeah, we started off, I had it the other way round with the panels at the side. So I had the nearer future on the left and the far future on the right. But that meant that you ended this page at the destruction of the Earth being swallowed by the sun. And that would be what you remembered, So my editing team helped me to work out that actually better to swap them round. So we tell the bad far future eventual, it will happen. It's sort of unescapable, probably. But our whole stories that we've told so far, Visible Animals, is 500 million years. And we've still got another 500 million years to play with, which is a really, really, really amazingly long amount of time. But, as humans, we could have a long time on this planet.
And then also, apart from this big story of the world and the theatre, if you read it sensitively, you know that it's talking about a little bit about our impact on the world as well, because this theatre is set on a rubbish tip.
Yes, I suppose the thing about rubbish is one person's rubbish is another person's treasure, and they're using the rubbish to make into puppets and stuff like that. So rubbish can be a source of creativity, but at the same time, I wanted you to not really be able to work out. Maybe you have to work out for yourself. I think that when books give you an open question but don't answer it, sometimes that means that you can't put the book back in the box and you have to kind of keep on wondering about it. So the page I think it might be the next page where we said that's all folks, and they're on, you pan out and you sort of see the theatre on the vast dump. It's for you to decide what it is.
Minnie, I'm sure we've only scratched the surface of what is a really brilliant book today. I just want to thank you so much for taking time to talk to me today.
Well, it's been lovely sharing it with you, Nikki, and it's so interesting because it's not until someone asks you about things that sometimes you realise what you were trying to do. So it's been a delight.
In the Reading Corner is presented by Nikki Gamble and produced by Alison Hughes. If you have enjoyed this podcast, please leave us a review. If you would like to find out about other events and courses, visit justimagine.co.uk. Join us again in the Reading Corner on your favourite podcast platform.